we need to understand what is Russia really up to. And for us to understand what's going on, is this just Russia going in and testing? Is this part of a grander plan? What is Russia really up to here? This is important for you to understand because it was just Ukraine, Russia, Russia, Ukraine for the longest time, and we thought that this is going to be okay, right? We don't have too much of an issue. I mean, it's an issue with Ukraine, obviously, but it is not an all-encompassing war that we're looking at, right? And this is the intent, and as you're looking all the events happening, you get to see what's going on. So what is going on right now in Ukraine and Russia? Essentially, what we have is a little bit of a stalemate where on one hand you have the U.S. that's basically saying that we want peace and is targeting several other countries, pressuring them to not to buy oil from Russia, although I don't think that's a real reason for it. But the point is at this point, it is kind of going nowhere fast. The U.S. has met with Putin, and there was a meeting, and then they discussed it, and they say, yes, I want peace. Everybody wants peace, but they're still fighting. Interesting enough, each time there is a lull of drones before any meeting with the U.S., and then after the meeting has happened, they bomb very strongly Ukraine. So I guess it is not really working, but efforts are being made, and at the end of the day, what we're trying to figure out is, so what is Russia up to? Because obviously this is not stopping, and Russia is a war economy. Okay, so what is the end goal? And it's important to understand because it's part of a geopolitical situation here that we have, right? Essentially, we're trying to figure out, it is where does this end? I mean, could we have a war? I mean, and at the end of the day, what we have right now, we're waiting for a peace treaty or a lull in the fighting, so that the Europeans already said we are willing to come in between Ukraine and Russia with our own troops, as long as the U.S. is willing to offer security guarantees. And that, frankly, the U.S. is basically saying we will offer security guarantees, but first we would like you to pressure as well. It's not a quid pro quo, but it's in the same sentence. Yeah, okay, security guarantees. Well, I guess we could fly a few drones, or we could help you with the satellite. But can you put pressure on Russia and China with 100% tariffs, so that we don't buy oil from Russia anymore? What are you doing to stop it? And frankly, at this point, they're not doing much of anything. What they have done, they have agreed, the Europeans have agreed to put troops in the middle. But that's maybe not enough. So in the meantime, September 9th, September 10th, 19 to 20 drones, allegedly Russian, launched from Russia territory, via Belarus, is essentially entered the Polish airspace. So the drone drifted or were flown deep into eastern, central, and northern Poland, traversing hundreds of kilometers in some cases. Poland scrambled jets. Some drones were shot down, at least 3. Poland invoked an Article 4 requesting consultation when a member feels its security is threatened. And NATO has responded with heightened alertness in its eastern flank and new efforts called the Operation Eastern Sentry. But they didn't do anything at all. In fact, the NATO secretary said, well, let's find out more information. And so NATO has responded with heightened alertness. New efforts called the Operation Eastern Sentry has been launched to bolster air defenses among allies. So nothing happens. And in fact, it was worse than that. Keep in mind that they sent a couple of drones out there, 19 to 23. And what they did in return, and I don't want to tell you how cheap the drones are, but in return, what the NATO did is send a bunch of very expensive planes after those drones. What if that instead of sending 19 to 23, they would have sent as many drones that they sent in Ukraine, like 200, 300. You don't have enough planes for that. You need a battery of Patriot missiles, but you don't have that either. You're not ready. So what was the idea? Yeah, well, the idea, they said basically, well, no, we didn't. Russia said we didn't send this, right? We basically we were sending it to Ukraine, but because of Ukraine, there was some kind of malfunction somewhere because electronic services, electronic, that they send in the air to confuse the drones. The drone gets confused and they went over there. We did not mean to go into Poland. So what does that mean? Well, essentially what Russia is doing is that it's testing NATO readiness. Many analysts believe that this incursion was less than inflicting damage and more about probing how NATO would respond. I don't think so. I don't think that's the reason. I think the reason Russia is doing that, and this will they'll tell you, that what assets will be deployed, how quickly, how much risk will allies assume in defending airspace. So basically what they're telling you is the reason Russia is doing this is because they want to test your defenses. For what? So that you could invade Poland? And then Germany, which is right next to it? And then what? You're going to invade Europe? Come on. Let's be real. No, that's not what they're doing. What they're doing, they are creating confusion, which is basically what the U.S. is doing as well, right? The U.S. is doing the same thing, quite frankly. The U.S. is doing the same thing because it's also in the process of trying to confuse the enemy in its own. For example, when it's telling India, stop buying oil from Russia. But you know very well that's never going to be, right? You're not expecting India not to buy 30% of its oil from Russia. They would lose too much money. So what are you doing? Well, you're creating confusion. You're creating confusion, you're putting tension amongst them. What you really want in the case of the U.S. is you want to have access to the agriculture land in the agriculture market in India. So you want to export the wheat from the Texas all the way to India. And obviously India says that's not possible. I don't want to do that. That's what they're doing. Now in this case, what Russia is doing is it wants to create a wedge, right? It's going to create a wedge within Europe and the U.S. by destabilizing them, by forcing them to realize that they don't have enough armies or security to protect themselves. Therefore, what they need to do is that they need to rely on the U.S. even more to say, well, we need more help here. This is not enough. You're confusing the children. That's basically, you're scaring the children. That's essentially what you're doing here. You're not doing anything else because you have no intention. Okay. Now, they tell you the message and deterrence dynamic. Russia may be sending a signal that its drone can reach NATO territory and that territory risk will go up and that the status quo may be changing. It increases pressure on NATO to demonstrate resolve. It's pressuring NATO to do something. But while they're doing something, they're not doing other things. The fact that several drones got through suggests gaps in detection, tracking, or interception systems. They're shaking them up. Basically, you're not as good as you think you are. So, and the reason they're doing that is because just before NATO, i.e. the European countries, were basically saying, okay, we're going to put our troops together, right? Our little troops together, and we're going to put them in between you and Ukraine. As long as the U.S., provides security guarantees. And he's basically showing them, right, you can even protect your airspace and you're going to come over into mine. I will shoot you down. Okay, that's basically what he said. And the Europeans, they realize that there's nothing you can't even protect your airspace, quite frankly, and you're going to bring armies onto my side. That doesn't. The fact that use of unnamed or decoy drones suggests testing or not necessarily immediate lethal intent, right? It's really psychological effort, right? Belarus is involved, right? Raise question of Belarus' role or control of its territory and its alignment. It is creating confusion in the situation, and then eventually, it's out there. And if they respond, for example, if they respond in kind and bomb, which they would not do if they had any brain, but if they do and they bomb Russia, you say, well, what are you doing? I mean, now you're starting something now, because I didn't do anything. I sent it over, but this I didn't mean to. This is a mistake. Okay, so NATO is enhancing its air defense along its eastern flank, more frequent patrols, reallocated jets, possible deployment of more air defense system, but it's not like they have the ability to do it. NATO is not capable of doing anything against Russia right now because Russia is a war economy. It's a war economy. That's all they do. They're just producing weapons after weapons and armies, and they're paying those people bonuses to go fight. So that's not going to happen in this way. Of course, this is something that you need to be very careful, because you keep poking the bear, eventually something is going to happen. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel, as I am looking and I'm helping. So we want to make sure that you understand what is going on right now in the world, because it will impact you. Now, of course, you're going to say, well, it's groundless. Okay, fine, psychological warfare. Okay, fine, you're going at it and you're showing that they can't do it. We all know it. But be careful, because you got lots of players involved. There's lots of hotheads, and Europeans want to show that they could do something, and the U.S. is getting upset as because the fact that you're attacking is even worse than attacking Ukraine. Now you're attacking NATO, and you're not doing anything, so you don't look you look very, maybe not weak, but ineffective in terms of the U.S. And that's not good, because that's how accidents happened. So NATO is enhancing its air defense along its eastern flank. They're doing more patrol, but that's enough. Poland is retraining and enhancing its anti-drone capabilities. But we all know that if tomorrow Russia wanted to get in there, there's nothing they could do. I mean, yes, France has the atomic bomb, but that's about it. Poland summoned ambassadors, lodged complaints. NATO allies have condemned the incursions as deliberate, but nothing happened to Russia. Right. So greater support and urgency for Eastern European countries, more cooperation, exercise, the heightened alarm among citizens in border region, possibly disruption of civilian flights. So obviously it's impacting their economy. If a drone causes death or serious damage, pressure for stronger military response. The incident may lead to more frequent drone flights, but the point is, nothing happened, and that's a problem. Now, of course, you're going to say, well, what's the point? What's the point from Russia? Have they ever done that before? Yes, they did. I mean, obviously, there's a lot into it, so I don't want to do a 5-hour live. We're going to do, one at a time, too. But you need to understand what's happening, because this is a developing story, right? So if you should know that in 2014, and this is when this whole thing started, frankly, the Baltic and NATO airspace violation, Russian jets in 2014 have frequently entered the airspace of NATO members like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Sweden without clearance. These flights often involve turned-off transporters, flying close to civilian routes. The goal is to test radar coverage, reaction time, and political will of NATO states. Remember what Biden said when Russia was at the border of Ukraine. Don't. Remember that? And nothing happened. Ukraine war spillover from 2022 to 2024. During the war in Ukraine, Russia repeatedly launched drone and missiles that strayed and struck NATO neighbors. Poland in November 2022. This is not the first time. A missile explosion near the border killed 2 civilians. Though later judged to be a misfired Ukrainian air defense missile, it showed how fragile the situation was. It was actually from Ukraine, not from Russia. Romania and Moldova, 2023 and 2024. Fragments of Russian drones used against Ukraine landed in a Romanian village. Moldavia regularly reports Russian missile overflights that violate its airspace. These incidents sparked sharp NATO warnings, but were treated as spillover rather than direct attack. It's a Cold War legacy behavior. Even in Soviet time, you need to understand that Putin is not a general. He's a member of the KGB, right? And basically, it's very covert, not overt, covert. Even in Soviet time, Moscow often pushed boundaries with airspace incursions, submarine entries, surveillance aircraft probing Western defenses. The tactic has always been the blur line: provoke, test, force adversaries to spend resources while staying just below the threshold of war. That's what it is. That's what it's about. You keep him busy. Because also, don't forget, Russia does not want the U.S. that close to Europe. So by shaking this foundation, it's preventing the U.S. to do what they need to do with Russia, with the European. So why does Russia use this strategy? Low cost, high pressure. Drones are cheap, while NATO interceptors are expensive. Russia gets intelligence and provokes costly responses. Russia can claim accident, technical errors that keeps NATO debating because, it's a democracy. Nobody could decide, I'd say I'm going to go for it. They have to talk. They're not going to do anything. Psychological leverage. Repeated incursions foster unease, suggesting that NATO territory is unvulnerable. So be careful when you tell me that you're going to put armies and you're getting going. Basically, I don't want you to be involved in this Ukraine situation. Hybrid warfare doctrine fits into a broader Russian pattern of mixing conventional pressure with cyber disinformation or economic disruption. And that's what they're doing. And the bottom line is Russia has used this strategy before, and they will keep on using this strategy. Why? Because it works. So the question is this: so what is the goal of Russia? What the heck are they thinking about? And no one really knows. We're going to analyze to see, what we think is going on, and obviously that's always good to know. But you need to realize as well that you have to be careful. This world is getting complicated. So what are they looking for? Well, obviously everyone is saying they're testing NATO readiness. I don't think so. I think they just, the only reason you would say you want to test the readiness is because you want to invade. That's never going to happen. 2, psychological and political pressure. Maybe they want to do that. These incidents create fear and uncertainty in the NATO states. It makes them to fight with each other, wonder what's going on, particularly those near the front line. They're asking the U.S. to help, and the U.S. is saying, well, I'm willing to help, but can you put pressure? In fact, it's asking NATO members to put pressure on China and on India, again, because they want to split them apart as well. All these countries have interest in making sure not everyone gets together too quickly. The biggest one of all is obviously the fact that they don't want China and Russia and India together, even though they are sharing common borders. Because then you got a situation. And it's not so much a war situation, right? The intent is not that. The intent is really to create a bloc, economic bloc. It's all about money at the end of the day. They want to create an economic bloc in order for them to keep doing business the way they have been doing business forever. But they want to do more business, but with each other. China right now is using less and less and less dollar in its economy. There's currently a big discussion with China to having a discussion with the U.S. in terms of the tariffs. They want some sort of an agreement. Are they going to get it? We shall see. But that's what it's at, really. So when they're telling you, be careful, there's going to be a war, World War III, it's not about that. It's not about that. It's about economics. So when you're preparing for war, you should be making sure that you're maybe developing more rare earth minerals. Maybe you should be making more of your medicine. That's what you should be focusing on. Because at some point, the door will close. That door will close and you will not have, in fact, the door is closed, not 100% closed, but it is closing for the rare earth mineral. And even the former Secretary of State, the first Secretary of State from the previous administration, the Trump administration, basically stating we got to do more to preserve the amount, our ability to get mineral in the U.S. What are we doing? Because in the immediacy, it's more of an economic war or posturing. And right now, China, in fact, they want Trump to come to China. He doesn't want to go, because they want to control the message. They can't agree. The amount of rare earth mineral has been reduced tremendously into the U.S. And that's a problem because you make weapons with these things, the magnets. So the most likely goal is an outright preparation for conventional attack. Instead, it's about probing defenses, sowing doubt, and increasing pressure and testing political resolve. And in this particular instance, it's to try to keep away the Europeans from keep the European away from the U.S. Nobody wins in a war. Okay, you go for a war when you have no choice. And frankly, you might even think that the reason why Russia invaded Ukraine is to create this environment of uncertainty as well. Because if the uncertainty, then it's tough to do business, to work. I mean, right now, what is the U.S. doing with Europe? It's asking Europe to tariff 100% on China and Russia, okay? So that and India and China, so they don't buy the Russian oil. So split those three apart. And because obviously you're not serious, right? That's not going to happen. But at least you're trying to pressure them. Now it is working with Mexico. It's asking the U.S. is telling Mexico to tax and to tariff the steel and the autos that's coming from China, because basically China is avoiding and is going through Mexico, and Mexico has no choice. What are they going to do? I mean, they're exporting a lot of stuff to the U.S., so they have to do what the U.S. is asking. Now, does Europe going to do the same thing? Well, they're discussing it, but they don't want to get too. They want to do some business with Russia, with China as well. So you see, at the end of the day, it's all posturing for your interests. And that's how it starts. But you have to be careful, because if you create a situation where there's no more moving parts and everything lacks, like in the 40s, where you basically created an embargo around Japan. What did Japan end up doing? They started World War III, World War II. Right? Why? Because they were blocked. They couldn't get out. They had to expand. They couldn't expand. There was a blockage around Japan. So they had to do what they do, and they invaded. They attacked Pearl Harbor, obviously, and then they did Manila and the island. They wanted to expand around where they were. Even China, they went to as further. So that's always a situation that needs to be very strong monitoring, because at the end of the day, this could develop into something else. Not right away. I'm seeing this more on the economic side at this point, but could we see something else developing? That's possible. Now, what is the U.S. doing and saying? Well, public affirmation of solidarity and defense of NATO territory. We are with you. The U.S. has declared that it will defend every inch of NATO territory after the incursion. U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, have called the incursion unacceptable. Though some statements emphasize that it's not yet clear whether the drones were intentionally targeted Poland. It's confusing. We don't know what's going on. Let's see what happened. Let's see. I mean, I don't want to accuse anyone. We're with you, but we really don't know exactly what happened. And quite frankly, I'm not so sure we really want to find out, because then we're going to have to do something. Balancing tone. I mean, President Trump, while affirming solidarity, suggested the incursion might have been a mistake, which has created tension with the Polish and NATO partners who reject that assertion. You see what I mean? That's exactly what Russia is looking for. What do you mean it's a mistake? It's not a mistake. Are you with us, or what are you doing, right? And that's what Russia wants. Russia wants to keep, and it's actually interesting, Russia wants to keep the U.S. away from Europe. Okay, the U.S. wants to make sure Russia stay away from China and from India. Right? They're all trying to put wedges so that you don't develop too much. Right? Because eventually, if you become very, very, very strong and powerful economically, right, then you get into a war, because then you think that you could do it. So the U.S. is pushing for more investigation, assessment, and allied consultation before making definitive accusation of intent. Now, don't forget, at some point, the U.S. wanted to go punitively after Russia in a very big way. And the way it's doing is through the president saying, why don't you go and tax those people to begin? Why don't you 100% tariffs there, 100%? But this is just talk, and unfortunately, if they don't do anything, then you look a little bit very ineffective. So, in the United Nations, acting U.S. ambassador reaffirmed that U.S. support for its NATO allies and condemned the incursion. Joint statements of multiple nations have condemned the actions, calling for Russia to be held accountable under international law. But nothing has happened. The responses show NATO is shifting from reactive to more proactive posture along its eastern border. Right, eastern sentry is a signal that the alliance is taking the drone threat seriously. But the U.S. response has been mixed. Clear about defending allies, because why is the U.S. Conflicted? Well, how are you going to keep Russia away from China if you're going after Russia in a very strong way, directly, right? What do? What you do is you're basically trying to cajole Russia into being a nice player, right? But you don't want to give them a reason not to like you. It's a balancing act daily, because on one end, you obviously don't want Russia to invade Europe, but that's not going to happen, and that's not what they are doing. But also at the same time, you want to make sure that it doesn't impact your relationship with Russia. I mean, remember a couple of months ago, the U.S. were all over Modi, and you're stealing the oil, you're taking the oil that you're getting from Russia, and you're reselling it on the black market. You're a thief. Who cares about you? And now, the U.S. is trying to get back with Modi, and they say he's my best friend again. So there's no friend, there's no enemy, there's just interests. And the moment your interests collide with somebody else's interest, then you have a war. We're not there yet. And that's why I want my subscribers to really understand what's happening, and don't forget to subscribe, because we're following many events, from the economy, the stock market, the dollar, the tariffs, the China situation that is decoupling for everyone else, the inflation. Don't forget, this Wednesday we're going to hear about interest rates. So there's a lot of event happening. This is a period. We're going through a very, very difficult and interesting period right now that we've never faced such uncertainty and such very important decision. Now, it doesn't really have to do with the current administration in the sense that they're causing it. No, they're just bringing it up to the table to be discussed. But all these things were happening regardless of who the president was going to be. Okay, inflation, China decoupling, these things are happening, and you need, and the fact that you don't in the U.S. is not enough production. These things are happening, and you need to understand what's going on, because otherwise, you're going to be left out behind. Not so much because the U.S. I mean, what do you care what's happening in the U.S. because it's going to have a direct impact with your livelihood. You need to understand what is going on, because if you don't, then you're going to be left out in the cold. Yep. You're going to be left out in the cold, and that is not something that you want to do. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean, look what's happening right now this week. This week we have, we have the rate discussion, and you're going to have a split, literally descent all over the Fed right now, right? Because you want lower rates. But be careful. Be careful for what you want for, because you may actually get it. What do I mean by that? Is the fact that right now there is a tremendous amount of inflation going on. At least, I mean, have you checked meat at Costco lately? Right? It used to be, ribeye used to be $17 a pound. Now it's $22 for the pro, and the choice was choice, and then for the normal was $13. Now it's $17. I was shocked. Coffee is more expensive. I did a live on that recently, but coffee prices going up a lot because what's going on in Brazil. So, I mean, prices are going up. The one thing you do not want, I mean, it's okay for prices to go up, don't buy the meat. I mean, it's okay. But if everything goes up and you have no choice but to pay for more prices, and the last thing you know is lower rates, because then you're going to make inflation even worse. Of course, the decision right now, what they're saying is, well, employment is dropping anyway, so that people don't have that many job opportunities, so they don't make as much money in the economy. So it could certain balance off the fact that inflation is going up. That's kind of what the Fed is kind of thinking right now. So hopefully it balances out each other. Yeah, but this was never an issue before, right? I mean, we never dissent at the Fed. This war in Ukraine is going on and on and on and on, and people are positioning. And of course, the administration is being very coercive in its approach to saying, 100% here, 50% there. Why are they doing it? They're doing it because the U.S. is running out of time. So I know. Well, what can we do against it? Well, there's nothing to do but to try to figure what's going on, because right now, obviously, you've seen that China and Russia and India got together, and they were talking, and they were basically agreeing on everything. And this is not new. I mean, India has been talking to China for quite some time, since last year, before the tariffs were happening. So that's what I mean, that this is a changing world. And the news that you see, and that's why I want you to join the channel, is when you hear the news, because it's bent, one way or the other. And obviously social media doesn't help. It's bent one way or the other. You really, you hear what you want to hear. Why? Because the algorithm, send you with what you want to hear. So the more you hear about it, the more you reinforce. Well, I don't like the administration. Look what they're doing. This is crazy. Yeah, but guess what? Even if it wasn't the current administration, you would still have to do something about the fact that the U.S. is not creating or building anything that is very important. The 100% of the 100% of your antibiotics are made in China. Well, as long as they're willing to give it to you, that's okay. But what if they say no? What do you think they're talking right now? They're starting the second round of discussion. And the good news is they still have to talk. they still have to discuss. They still feel the need that they have something that they need. Why is Russia still talking to the U.S. while slowly getting more and more and more independent? Well, they want the U.S. because they need a market to sell their wares. They have a huge amount of factories that are producing stuff, and they need to go out at the detriment of Europe, which is seeing all the amount of cheap Chinese goods coming in as a horrible prospect. There is deflation in China. Deflation. Prices are actually going down. So they need to sell stuff to the U.S., and the U.S. consumer is the largest consuming machine in the entire world, where 25% of GDP comes from the U.S. So it's a big deal. Then you need the U.S. And what does the U.S. need? Well, the U.S. needs a pharmaceutical item, and they need, they need the chips and the semiconductors, and they need also the fact that we need rare earth minerals. Why don't we have rare earth minerals? Because the U.S. really never is dirty. It's very polluting. It's not rare. There's nothing rare about the rare earth mineral. So you see, that's what I want my subscribers and my members to understand what's going on. And I make recommendation every day in my member channel in terms of how could you benefit from that. Well, right now what you should be looking for really is rare earth mineral companies. Start to looking at that. Start looking at gold companies as well. Gold stocks, rare earth mineral stocks. I made a couple of recommendations, and we have 40-50% already. It's not very complicated. You just have to know what to look. You got to make sure if you're going to buy a stock, make sure that it is not it is growing. It's got sales. It's in a very interesting environment right now. Gold is interesting. Rare earth mineral is interesting. Soon quantum computing is going to be interesting. And don't worry too much about the fact that, we're going to have an AI bubble. No, you don't have an AI bubble. This is just words. What you have a couple of stocks that are overvalued. You cannot compare this to the dot-com bubble of the 1995 2000. It's not the same thing. These were fly-by-night companies that were giving them billions of dollars. Now we're talking NVIDIA. Yeah, I know we're paying a lot for NVIDIA, but it's a strong company, and you're paying a lot of money for lots of different stocks. So don't worry too much what you hear. The same way, don't worry too much about what you hear about the fact that Russia is going to invade Europe. When you hear that, okay, when you listen to that in Europe, that's what they're thinking. In fact, at some point, they are talking about actually taking the people's money, right, to actually build factories for the weapon, right, to protect themselves against Russia. But that's not the reason why they're doing it. Again, this is a two-tone. The reason they're doing it is because Europe needs money. France, particularly, is running out of time because they also have a huge amount of debt. This is five prime ministers they've gone through. Lots of upheaval over there. Lots of upheaval. Because why? Because they borrowed, and now they realize that we have to pay the retirees, and we can't afford it, and we have borrowed too much money, and we don't want to get tight. We don't want to, we don't want to. I'm not saying I don't want to work, but we want to retire at 55, 62 years old. That's not going to happen. This is over. So that's the reason they're saying that we need the money. We need the money to fight the war. But that's not what they read. So most of the time, what you hear is not really what's happening. The U.S. wants to hit 50% tariffs on India because the U.S. does not want India to buy oil from Russia. No, that's not really the reason. The U.S. is not trying to stop that war. The U.S. wants to make sure that India does not stay that close to China. And it's losing that battle, quite frankly, because when you see what happened 2 weeks ago, they were all together in China with the army, all together, great army, great pictures together, and the U.S. wasn't there. Okay, and frankly, they also, but this is not new. I mean, don't forget, they just don't show up and meet the next week. Now, this has been taking for at least a year. They've been talking about this. Late in 2024, China basically say, okay, to India, which they've been fighting quite some time. Let's stop fighting. Okay, let's stop fighting between because they have a common borders. They had actually had 1 or 2 wars actually where people actually died because they were going in and out. Say, okay, no more of this. There's no reason for us to fight. So let's stop fighting. Let's be friend here. And by the way, we could start in January 2025. They started flying. You could fly from China into India and into China because you couldn't do that for the longest time. So there was a pretty bad situation over there. But now this is over. And then they invited each other into temples, and they had a good time, and then they removed visa, and then they visited each other, and before you know it, it's been happening way before the tariffs. So don't get fooled by telling you the tariffs is causing them to get closer. That is not true. It's not helping, but this is not the reason why they're doing it, because they were doing it before the tariffs. And China and Russia, I will tell you that they are actually, and they've been doing it since the beginning of the year, they have been actually doing joint military exercises. Can't get closer than that. Can't get closer than that. So them telling you that the tariffs are causing all the upheavals in the world is not true. Right? They have been getting close together before this, so this is not new. And that's why you need to, when you look at the news, you need to really see, always ask yourself, remember Black Swan, right? And then say to yourself, what's the real reason? What is the real reason? Because you need to understand the real reason, because obviously if there's a war, forget your stock portfolio, forget the job, forget everything else. Everything is up in the air. Now, of course, you're going to say, we would never have a war. Well, not now. But the reason you have a war is when your interests collide with somebody else's interests. And you can't agree. I mean, if tomorrow the U.S. says to China, you know what? Forget your rare earth mineral. Forget your medicine. I don't want it anymore. Okay, we're going to make it ourselves. In fact, the administration is already talking about increasing tariffs of 100% on pharmaceutical items. We're going to get the stuff in ourselves. We're closing the door. What do you think is going to happen in China? The people that are working factories are going to say, well, who's going to buy our stuff? Right? I mean, China is not doing the greatest right now in terms of deflation and economic prosperity. That's, the government is managing everybody and nobody is complaining too much, but it's not a plethora of happiness and business acumen, right? So what they're doing is they're saying, well, at the end of the day, maybe, well, then who's going to buy our stuff? Well, send it to Europe. You're going to say, well, hold on. I mean, we're not going to, that's too much. So then the Chinese people working in China are going to be very unhappy. And they're going to turn to the government. What are you going to do about it, right? Do you want China to become a war machine like Russia? Because to protect its interests? Because that could happen very quickly. And don't forget, once you start, for example, that Russian machine right now that's generating, that is becoming a war machine, that thing is not going to disappear. You just can't say, okay, you know what? Let's just stop. Let's just stop fighting. Don't forget to join the channel and give me a likes, by the way. That war machine is just not going to stop that way. That's going to take quite a bit of time before you are able to continue the way you have in the past. And that's the danger that you're running up against. The danger is that it gets locked in. So at the end of the day, what you want to do is you want to make sure you follow the situation very carefully, because it is a developing situation. The U.S. is saying, I don't know what's going on. Let's find out more. The Europeans are complaining a little bit. They're going to send some more. But obviously, you're fighting the wrong war because you're not having the drone. You need the real drone, not the plane. You're not going to send a plane against a drone. What if they send 500 drones? What are you going to do? 500 planes? You don't have enough. Right? And frankly, the U.S. also is running out of ammunition, quite frankly. And that's what happened during the Israeli war. So I want you to be very aware of that and to understand. And we shall see you very soon with more pertinent information of what's really going on.